Sometimes there are topics where you just need to talk to the experts on. Recently, I talked to Rusty Holmes in regards to mental fitness, but today I'm going to talk to Lucy Nesbitt in regards to mental health. Lucy Nesbitt is a certified life coach, life skills facilitator, and life skills counselor. She provides workshops, talks, and lectures on various topics pertaining to musicians and music educators. Lucy's private practice, Musician Mindfulness, offers a wide variety of coaching programs, hybrid coaching lesson programs, and workshops. Her goal is to bring mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health awareness into the spotlight in the arts industry, while also providing real-time support to artists in Canada and beyond. Without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Lucy Nesbitt. Hello, Lucy. Welcome in. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Yeah. This is going to be a lot of fun talking to somebody else. For those that haven't seen it, I talked to Rusty Holmes, who's all about the mental fitness side. You're a little bit more on the mental health side, so a lot of this is going to be very complimentary. So this will be really cool, especially for me, just to get two different perspectives, and I'm sure other people will find that very fascinating as well. So this is really, really exciting. So my first question for you is, what got you into this whole mental health side of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. A few different things. I feel like it was a little bit inevitable for me as well. I'm very suited to this kind of work. But I think mostly what happened was kind of just my own experience as a human being with health. And then also just some of the experiences that I had going through music school and learning various different techniques to help myself with my mental health, while also having some really big crises along the way. So I think that it was just sort of a mix of circumstance. And then when the pandemic happened, I was in the midst of deciding to either go do a master's program in the States for performance or to defer and just kind of like cool a little bit, see what else I could do. And I ended up taking that route, which it's been really good. I love it. I'm doing a really cool program specifically catered to this stuff now. So yeah,
perfect.
Kind of a bit roundabout, but here I am.
Yeah, very good. So you mentioned some personal things. Do you have any stories that you can share that kind of brought you into this?
Yeah. Many stories, as we all have, I think. I feel like for me, though, a lot of what has been happening was just having a character that was very sensitive. I've been doing music since I was really little, because I did piano. But then I started playing in an orchestra when I was 11. And I have perfectionist tendencies, as again, I think a lot of us in this industry do. And yeah. Chronic people-pleasing tendencies and all kinds of things, while also being very deeply sensitive. So I think that I was kind of inclined to find myself in some painful situations and not really sure how to handle them, not really sure what I was experiencing. Some things with some, teachers when I was young that just didn't land quite right, and they stuck with me and I didn't know what to make of them. And then, just, working my way through various different organizations and finding myself in university and just struggling to stay well and also stay really good at my instrument and stay good at the craft. So there were different ups and downs along the way, but ultimately it was just a lot of fear. I had a lot of fear as I was growing up, and the music industry is really tough. And people are really hard on you there because, everybody wants to be good. For somebody who is really hard on themselves, it can get to be really overwhelming. So I think that I got to about fourth year. Actually it kind of happened in third year. I just ran into a brick wall. My teacher and I were just like, we didn't know what to do with me anymore, which was really fair because my teacher is not a counselor. But I didn't know what to do. And so I started reading, like Eckhart Tolle and all kinds of deep stuff. And I realized how anxious I was and how much fear was kind of driving my life. And so I sort of started to do some of that work then, but then of course you get into the grad school audition circuit, and it's pretty much just, if you're not really careful about it, it can be a road to burnout. And that's what happened for me, and I ended up getting really sick a couple summers ago for many different reasons. But yeah, a lot of it was just burning out from being on the French horn trek without proper and adequate care to balance it out. So yeah, there's lots of stories, but I think that gives you the general overview.
Yeah, a really good general overview for sure. And as you were going through all this, did you notice that there was a bit of a stigma in regards to like the whole mental health and trying to figure out what was going to work for you?
You know what? Actually, I've been pretty lucky. I have to be honest. I haven't come up against the stigma until I started doing this work to help others. When I started to notice not necessarily stigma, but just reluctance or resistance, just from a place of not knowing for the most part. But for me, I definitely felt stigma from myself to myself for not being able to go as hard as I thought that I should be able to go. So I pushed myself to some pretty intense limits that just they didn't vibe with me. It didn't work out for me the way that I had anticipated. But everybody around me was really supportive. So I was very lucky in that regard. And pretty much, as soon as I found out, I got to work with Carolyn Christie. She's from the MSO, and she's in life coaching now. So she was helping me out at NYO. She was there when I was doing NYO a couple years ago, and she's life coaching, and she just like shone this light on this part of my life that I had never really thought to look into. And I was like, oh my God, like I need to be doing this with people. I need to be helping people to do what this lady has just done for me, because this changed my life and it was amazing. And so now, I've been having lots of conversations with people and running workshops and doing all kinds of stuff. And I notice the stigma. I notice the resistance or the reluctance to talk about it, because I'm realizing it's really not talked about. Like, people will talk about physical health a lot more these days. Like, I think that, we get a lot of Alexander technique or various different like yoga or whatever it might be for musicians at a lot of the programs that get run. So that I think is fantastic. But I'm not quite seeing the same drive to the other components, so emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, mental wellness, and physical wellness. You need all four for a holistic approach, right? So, so I do see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when it comes, I just had a thought and it kind of escaped me. Hold on, hopefully it'll come back to me. But in terms of like things not being talked about, that's what was sparking for me. Like, that's my whole goal with this channel, is I always want to bring up topics that people aren't talking about, plus things that I just find fascinating. It's like, oh, I just want to do this anyway. But this definitely falls into that category of like, I haven't heard anybody talking about this whole thing. So when I saw Rusty doing his thing, that's what interested me there. And then of course I see your stuff and it's like, oh yeah, let me get more. Because this is not something that I've delved into, I don't know much about, and I haven't seen a whole lot of it. So for me personally, I'd like to learn, just because it's something new, something I haven't seen. And so that's where I want to go further into that, into this stigma, and what have you seen in terms of the stigma against it, and why do you think people are so against it? Yeah. Or not talking about it, really?
That's such a great question. And it's a really important one. I feel like it's more important to ask that why question. It's like, why is this not being talked about? Why is it more difficult to talk about mental or emotional health than physical health? And I think that the answer to that would be different for everyone. But usually when those kinds of things come up, it's because there's something inside of us that's like, you're kind of like questioning me a little bit here. Like, what are you, right? Because I think, in my opinion, and this is all just my opinion, of course, but it seems to me that the industry that we're in has become pretty tough. And it might have always been that way in the capacity that like the classical world operates. So I think that there's a lot of tradition, and that tradition in Western classical music tends to be steeped in a culture that is not so open to expressing the icky stuff, the stuff that like makes us squirm inside. So, and I think that a lot of us want to protect that part of ourselves. We don't, it's not like pleasant to experience or to feel. And so we try to put on our best, put your best foot forward and show up and do your work and work really hard. And I think that there's quite a culture of like the grind and just being really, on this path. And I think a lot of us, we have to do that because it's elite work that we do. Right. But that having been said, we're human beings first. We can't really make music if we aren't alive. So it catches up to us eventually. And I'm not sure. I don't quite know why it's not so talked about. But I believe and I would understand that it's because there's so much discomfort around it. And it takes a lot of vulnerability and courage to be like, I feel awful inside, or I have all these feelings and they're too much for me and I don't know what to do with them. Because that takes courage, and it's not easy to do, especially when you're living in a culture that doesn't want you to stop moving. So I think, and then of course, once one person has had to stifle themselves for their entire life, then that's what they teach to others. And it becomes part of the culture that we say, don't talk about it, don't even think about it, just do your work and you're going to be okay. And that's that's pretty generic, because we talk about our feelings, like we go out, after the concert, we're all roasting everything that happened, but there's like a limit, so I think that's what I see, is just that like generationally and culturally it's not present, and a lot of that stems back to some traditions that I see in various different parts of our society. But so that's what I think about it. I mean, I'll probably think something different in like another week, but that's what I thought of today.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfectly fine. Well, and as everything's kind of different for every person, as you said. So even that's kind of how you're feeling now, but then we all kind of morph and change a little bit. So as a generic, that makes sense. And, speaking from personal experience with changing from how things were, looking at how I was 2 years ago to today, I didn't realize my mental health was really low. It was very, very low. And I kind of, over the last 2 years, kind of had ups and downs with what's been going on for me personally. But now I'm finally like, especially talking to Rusty and then getting this conversation here is really letting me know, like, okay, I'm on the right track of like what I'm trying to do for myself. And so it's kind of cool. So everything's kind of on the up and up for me, and hopefully in about 2 months I'll be fully set with where I want to be and got things moving forward. But it all depends on what happens, because I crossing my fingers that concerts do start up. I have 4 I lost count, 4 booked for this month, and I'm excited. They start next week with Brahms too. I'm like, yes, let's do it. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and hey, kudos to you too for saying all that. I think that, having these conversations is really great, where you get somebody who's like in the mental health field come in and talk about it, but it's also really cool that you just mentioned what has been going on with you, and that does take bravery, like I was just saying. So I appreciate that. Thank you for telling me about it. I hear you.
I think that's something that we all need to be able to, is depending on who it is, like be able to open up to somebody, whether it's a good friend, but if things seem to be pretty dire, you might want to see somebody specialized. I wonder if I know somebody who would be good at this. So I just lost my train of thought because I was just, that joke that was my joke.
Yeah. No, we were talking about having somebody to open up to.
Oh, yeah. And for me,
like,
I didn't go into specifics here, and it's it would take far too long. And since this is going to be released more publicly, I'm going to kind of leave it there. But it's one of those things that we all need to be aware of. There's a handful of people that know the situation of what I've been through and have been very helpful to get me out. So I'm actually really excited to get my life back together with where things are going to go. So another one of the topics that you had brought up to me was the perpetuated trauma and flaws in music pedagogy. That fascinates me because I'm very curious of where you're going with this.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that it's really important to bring this one up really courteously, right? Because it's really hard to talk about this stuff because it hurts and it ruffles our feathers, and it's good that it does. So if anybody's watching this and is feeling a little bit, that's okay. That's great. That's really good, because then we're asking questions, right?
And if you saw my interview with Rusty, be okay with being uncomfortable.
There you go. Exactly. A perfect segue. Wow, he's awesome. Oh,
he's a great guy.
Yeah, he really is. Sorry about there's noise.
That's fine.
So, I think that so this honestly is a good bridge from what we were talking about before with, it starts with somebody who's had to put down a lot of crap and just deal with it and just muscle through their experiences and then continue on. There's a saying, I'm not really sure who would have started this one, but hurt people hurt people. And we often talk about this. So in my education right now as training to be a counselor, we talk about this typically in the form of just like abuse. Could be in a family setting, in a relationship setting, whatever it is. But understanding that someone who has taken on the role of the abuser has been abused themselves. In some way, there is something inside of them, likely a trauma, that hasn't been processed. So the other thing to understand too about trauma is that there's what we call little t traumas and then the big T traumas. So there can be some really, really powerful events that happen to people that get stuck in their nervous system. So I'm not too sure if those who are listening are familiar with trauma. If you're not, you should read some stuff by Dr. Gabor Mate. He is amazing in talking about this stuff. But I will share a little bit of what I've learned. Trauma is not, it's not the event. It's how your body responds to the event. It's what gets stuck inside your body when something traumatic happens to you and you're not able to process that out. So what that might mean is that if you are, maybe you have a teacher who throws something at you, to go back like a few years, because I hope people aren't doing that anymore, and you can't react, but you're dead afraid, and you're like in fight or flight or freeze, and you can't do anything about it. You have to smile and you have to play, and you have to play good. That would probably be a little T trauma, or a big T trauma. If somebody threw something at you, like that's a no-go. But just this idea that all of a sudden there is an event that is in our nervous system that has not been processed out. Now, trauma manifests in many different ways. For a lot of people, it'll manifest as injury or illness in their lives. It can also manifest into just different patterns, ways of life to kind of accommodate for what's happening inside of you. So, I think that if there are generations and generations of teachers who have learned from the greats, who've accumulated some traumas along the way, whether it was that they were abused, they were yelled at, they were scolded, they were punished, or whatever it might be, because typically what I see in our industry is that our pedagogy is in the very much punishment, fear-based, kind of like, let's go, let's crack the whip. Which scientifically now has been completely disproven that does not work. It just leads to more trauma. And I'm referring to, actually, it's this book right here. It's called Changing for Good. I'll show you. I'll just show you since it's here.
Yeah, why not?
So, yeah, I think that the idea of empowerment and motivation versus, so this is in an addictions kind of framework of how to change with an addiction. But yeah, so there's a lot of this cracking the whip and pushing it down of the body's natural response to fear. And that's just kind of like laying the groundwork for trauma. So how does that manifest? What happens when we have people who are now performers, educators, clinicians, whatever, who are living with trauma in their bodies that is unprocessed and is kind of participating in how they're living and teaching because it's what they know and it's also what they've endured. Nobody was necessarily there for them, and that thing needs tending to. Like, hurt people. It's not their fault. They're hurting. And so I think sometimes when folks are hurting, and they don't have anyone there for them to provide empathy and to help them to work through that and process whatever is trapped in there, sometimes it just comes back out. And so then they kind of would maybe pass that along to their students or to people around them. Sometimes it's not even, we wouldn't be seeing people who are abusing their students, but their methodology might still have that same energy of what they went through. And so their student is like, oh my God, I'm afraid of you. And now I'm repressing my fear over and over and over again, and I'm scared. And then they're fearfully going out into the world, engaging again in this thing. So it seems very cyclical to me. And as humans, it's so important when we interact with one another, but we can really feel a person's energy. So it feels like it's something to be cognizant of. And something I can offer too from a counseling and coaching perspective is that, our main task as a counselor and coach is to work on our biases and to deal with our crap. Because when we go into a room with our clients, we can't afford to have any bleed through from our life into theirs. They don't need that. That's not what they're there for. They got enough stuff going on.
No, yeah, exactly.
They don't need to carry my stuff too. Not even energetically. Like if I come in there and I'm like, hi, right? They would be like, it would be, it would be unbelievable to have that experience with a counselor. And in my opinion, it would be unbelievable to have that experience with a teacher. When you're showing up to be vulnerable, to be creative, some of our students are their children, their youth. A lot of them are. So it's something to take into consideration is just, okay, like, what's my baggage that I'm bringing into this person's life, because I am adding my baggage into theirs if I decide to do so. So, yeah, that's what I think about that.
And so for those of us that are old enough that are now on the teaching side, what are things that we can be aware of that we might potentially be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a tough thing, because I feel like what I'm presenting right now is like some deep inner work and healing work too, to notice like, okay, like what are these tendencies that I have? What are my experiences that have stuck with me? And what do I need to do to process what happened to me so that it's not affecting me anymore? And there's a lot of ways you can go about doing that, but with everything, right? I think that awareness is just so important.
Right? Just to be aware of it,
Yeah, aware and compassionate to yourself too. Because if you're hurting...
So I think something... Yeah, and you could probably confirm this, but something that we can do is potentially just watch our students and see how they're reacting to us. Is it more on the positive side, or do they actually seem afraid? And if they're afraid, maybe that is something that we're doing that might be coming out in our teaching.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's, it's funny, hey, this student-teacher relationship, but those students, man, they teach us more than we might ever teach them. They're young, they're fresh, they're babies. Sometimes they're not. I've had lots of senior students myself, and those are some of the most incredible lessons I've ever taught in my life. Like, it's such a transference. It's a human interaction, and so there's tons to learn, like you're saying, just in observing how our students are interacting with us and not being afraid to ask them and to openly receive what feedback they do give us, right? So, if I had a kiddo in my lesson room and they seemed really they seemed really not doing so good, I might be like, hey, like, this is what I'm noticing. Like, what do you need right now? Like, or do you feel safe enough to share with me what's going on for you and what headspace you're in? Like, what can we do for you with where you're at right now? It's important to know that teachers aren't counselors, and you're not coaches, and you're not expected to be those things. But yeah, there are totally tools like empathy and nonviolent communication and emotional literacy, all of these things, to just assist our students in feeling safe. Safety is like, it's a felt sense. If somebody doesn't feel safe, they're not safe. Their body isn't safe. It's got its defenses up, right?
Right.
So, yeah, noticing and engaging with your students and just being like, yeah, like, what's going on with you right now? Like, where are you at? You seem scared. You don't want to be confrontational about that one either. So use your judgment. Exactly. But yeah, and then doing some deep reflection with that experience after the fact to be like, okay, like, my student is afraid of me. What's going on there? Like, you know, I'm working with a teacher right now in school, and he's telling us about, you know, like, blame. There's always something that we're bringing to the table too. And it's more important to work on that than to blame somebody else for what they've brought to the table. We can't control that. So our students are afraid. It's like, well, it's their fault. You know, they need to toughen up, or they clearly had a bad experience. It's like, sure, maybe, but you were there too. So what's your role in this, right? And just sifting through and exploring what's there, and who knows, you might find something really interesting. You might not find anything at all. Maybe the student was just having a bad day. But you never know. It's a learning experience.
Right. Yeah. Now, you just said something that I find quite interesting, and I was trying to figure out how to actually bring this up, but because you said it was just perfect. And that is, I've heard a lot of people say, as private lesson teachers, we tend to be kind of mini counselors on the side. And I always wondered, like, a part of me really believed that, but then a part of me was just like, not really, because we don't have that training either. So I'm curious what your response is with that, because the approach that I always had was tried not to do that, but I always like kind of tapped into my students to see how they're feeling. And that would just adjust how I'm teaching. It's like, okay, if they're having a good day or we want to get a lot of work done, okay, let's get, you know, really hard on them. But then if they're having a bad day, it's like, well, let's just have a lot of fun today. So I try not to be the counselor, but I try to react to how they are feeling.
Yeah. But your students love that.
Oh, they do.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something that we do in counseling and in everything in the wellness field is just meet your client where they're at. You can't fix anybody. Just meet them right where they're at and just support that moment, right? And that can be really helpful for students too. But yeah, no, that's a good question and like conversation around, what is the role of teachers in their students' experience? And again, I imagine it would be different for everyone, but my belief is that no, you're not a coach, you're not a counselor. And when I say coach, I mean like life coaching. This is like another facet, right? So that's not your role. You're not trained to do so. However, there are some really cool tools that you can pull from those kinds of things to help ease the moment for yourself and for your student. Because part of being a teacher is, and if you have a student who's having some kind of struggle going on, you don't want to take that on either. That's not your emotional baggage. So there's some skill there in how can I provide empathy for this student? What does that even look like? And there are some ways, like you can, this is something I'm trying to develop workshops for music educators to just like pull these skills, like give it to the teachers so that they've got this stuff, right? Because nobody taught them how to handle students who are having some kind of a mental health crisis. And we're seeing that a lot these days. So yeah, like how can I provide empathy to this person and be there for them? And then also, this is not my job, but here's what I can tell you, and here's what I can offer for us to do. So I think that there are some skills that we can pull from the counseling field, and also some, I'm not really sure what the word for it is, but like you use the word training, and that to me just like jogged my mind about ethics, like especially with youth students. Like, we as music teachers do not go through ethical training. I don't know about you, if you've ever been through any kind of ethical training to sit one-on-one in a room with a kid. Like, in the counseling world, it's huge, the things that we have to know and do and respond to with youth. And so the fact that there's no training, there's no ethical training, and there's no real, there's awareness, but not to the same degree of power dynamics and the hierarchies and the things that does. So we don't have that kind of training, which means we need to be really, really on it and responsible with our intentions in those practice rooms, or not practice rooms or lesson rooms, but you know what I mean? Like, there are things that we just don't receive as music teachers, which is no fault of our own. It's our industry that's behind. But there's a lot of stuff that we kind of have to start doing to show up better for our students. So no, you will not ever, you won't, unless you are, in which case, contracts. But you're not a counselor for your student. But that doesn't mean that you can't have some tools and show up with empathy and grace, and really, like, do your part to make sure that person is safe with you.
Yeah. You bring up a point that I almost wanted to possibly make a video about this in the future, and that is, what are we missing from university? When we're getting our degrees, what's missing? And almost like I don't know what would be good in terms of the counseling side, but some kind of class that would inform about these kinds of things, possibly have a little bit of that training, obviously not to the same degree, but enough to give you a little bit of a framework. Another one to kind of give you the idea of where I'm going with this is I support musicians taking an acting class. Cool, and the reason for that is performance. Do you want to go out on stage and you're like, and it's like, no, even if you're having a bad day, you have to be a lot more positive. You have to appear happy on stage. And if you're like, I don't want to perform this piece, you still want to go out there and be happy. I see it a lot with certain pop shows where musicians are just kind of down on themselves and like, I don't want to do this show, but I got to, it's the job, blah, blah, blah. For me, I'm happy to play. So I even if it's a piece that I'm not a fan of, I go out there with a big smile on my face. I'm ready to go. And this reminds me of a lot of the Fearless camp that Jeff Nelson does. I can actually remember him doing something similar where he would say, the power of being positive on stage. He would walk in kind of shuffling around like, play the most beautiful thing ever. And it's just like, that was just great music. And then he walks off like, it's like, what's going on? And then he comes out and he acts all happy, plays the opening to Strauss 1 and just cacks every single note. It sounds awful. And he walks off positive and he says, how did you feel about those two? And we're all just like, actually, just because you were happy about that Strauss 1, and it's that's what gave me the idea, really, of just like, it'd be great to have an acting class. For me, I actually had to take a dance class. Cool. Which I thought was the worst thing ever when I took it. But then looking back on it, it's like, actually, that was not a bad idea. The class was called Movement, and we had to do a bunch of different types of dance styles, and it's just like, this is awkward at the time. But I think in the end, it was actually very helpful in terms of performance anxiety, getting you out there to do something you're uncomfortable doing. It's like, I'm there to sit on my butt and play my horn. I'm not out to dance. Like, it was so weird, but it was very beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many layers to that.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just the vulnerability of unrestricted movement is huge and is terrifying and is deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people. So, why? Why is that scary? And then why, then, are we not so expressive in our music that we feel that it's safer? Whereas that same vulnerability is clearly not there then. So why? I have a curiosity around that. I experienced this myself. I'm very, very shy about dancing and singing, but I've been doing them recently and it's like changed my entire life. It's so much fun, and it's there is so much more expression than what I can do with my French horn, you know? Like, I can put all of this into my instrument, but I had to be willing to go there first. And the next layer that I have to acknowledge is that it's really scary. So when we have students who are that afraid to go to that place, we have to be really careful about pushing them to go there, right? Because that's one of those perhaps big T or little t traumas, is like, you're asking me to move. And, you know, this happens a lot in like master classes where whoever's teaching it will be like, just dance, just sing. And the person is like, every bone in their body is saying, no, you can see it. You can see them retracting. And they're just like, no, right? And so it's like a great thing. Like, you and I know this, the dancing and like movement is so beneficial. But yeah, as teachers, like we got to make sure our students are into it, or else like then they will just be afraid, and that gets stored, and they won't have as much fun dancing, which is just a shame. And I also sorry, I just felt called to speak to because again, this is my role in the world. What you were saying about so many musicians going to play their show and they're like, I don't want to be here. That's pretty telling. Anyway, I just wanted to shine a little light on that one too. It's interesting.
You just reminded me of the experience that I had for the 1 year that I taught oral skills. I taught oral skills 1 and 2, or oral training. Depends on what school you went to, what they call it. But it's the whole sight singing business and all of that. And it just reminded me of one of the first things that I did. It's like, I know everybody's going to be afraid to sing. It's like unless they're a vocalist. But it's like, I play my instrument. I don't sing. And the first thing I did is I said, all right, here we go. I played a chord on the piano and I sung terribly. I sung out of tune with the worst tone possible, just going like, ah! And they all laughed at me, and I just said, no, I'm okay. Nothing happened. You all laughed. You thought it was funny. It's okay. Some of you are going to have a hard time starting. That's okay. And, I'm here to help you. It's just like, it was one of those things.
That's lovely. Yeah.
I don't know how well it worked. That's something that I kind of want to revisit at some point and talk to like some of my former students, because the situation was really, really weird. I was hired 1 week before classes started, and I had never taught a class before. And so it was a lot of new learning elements for me at the same time. So it would be really cool to go back and actually reflect on that, especially with the students that I do talk to some of them on occasion. So it'd be cool to see what their perspective is, and hopefully they'll be honest with me.
Yeah, hopefully, because that sounds like it would be really fascinating to see, what that would do. And it sounds like you did the absolute best you could, right? Like, you give folks an offering to be like, hey, like, I'm out here making a fool of myself too. Like, we're in this together, So that's really cool. And it's a great idea. Yeah,
and I don't think I did the best job teaching. I'd love to try it again and actually be a better teacher in it. But there's only so much you could do, last second. Not something that you've done before. But it was a really good experience. But it is what it is. Yeah. So anyway, let's get back on track with the mental health side. So. One of the topics you have are the different types of mental health supports and general life support that are out there. So we talked a little bit about this, but do you want to expand?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, again, it's so unique. I feel like I'm surprised I didn't say this earlier, but with anything to do with health, mental health, physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever it is, there's no one size fits all. And also, like, each individual is the expert in their life. So you can trust yourself. You're the only person who's lived this walk of life, so you know best. And I love to just make sure everybody knows that before offering too many suggestions, because, you know best. I don't know best. I haven't lived your life. So there's lots of things, and it's curious with counseling and coaching and all this stuff. This is kind of like one-on-one approach to health and wellness, and it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because in truth it takes a village, and there's no shame in that. Like, that's just such a fundamental truth of being a human, is that we need our team, and we are part of someone else's team too. Like, we are relational beings, and So finding the folks in your life who are your support network is not just a big deal. It's like, it's vital. It's vital to your well-being, and people you can really rely on. Like we were talking about this earlier. You were mentioning you've had some people in your life who are really there for you, and it's made a difference. It's not like you couldn't do it on your own, but you don't have to. Like, that's not really the point. Like, because especially if you need it, just considering that you are that person for somebody else too. So finding those people can be really huge, and it's usually the first step in just making sure somebody's okay. It's just, who's your support network? Who do you call when things are too much? And just knowing that exists, and really putting effort into building that too. Like, having those relationships with people it's a beautiful thing, pretty fundamental human need. And then I think as far as different types of resources for musicians in specific, and artists, any artists, just get curious. It's like, if you've got something that's going on for you and you're like, okay, my arm hurts so bad every time I pick up my instrument. Okay, what can I do about this? So maybe you try physiotherapy. Maybe you try seeking out some other form of just movement coach. Maybe you try somatic therapy. This is something that I've gotten really quite passionate about. I'm hoping to do some certification in this too. So somatic therapy is it's a body-based trauma healing approach. It's really cool. And I don't know many musicians who know about that. Oftentimes we're just like, okay, gotta go to physio, gotta get my this in. But it's like, okay, for sure, help what's happening in your body. But let's dig into your nervous system and why that injury exists in the first place. What is it that you're holding there, So, you can reach out to various different professionals for different things, seeking coaching or counseling. Again, there's so many different types of things that are available. So just, meeting things with curiosity, right? When something's going wrong, it's not really going wrong. There's just something to learn, and there's something to get curious about. And then it's a little bit more fun, right? It's like, okay, been having a really crappy month. What can I do about it? Like, what's out there? Because chances are nobody told you about everything, so there's likely something that you haven't found just yet. Lots of resources in the world. You just have to be curious to find them, and if you're not really sure where to go, then try asking somebody in your team. Maybe they know about something.
Yeah. There's no harm in asking. The worst you're going to get is, I don't know. And it's okay. Then you go on and talk to somebody else. But you kind of just touched on a point that Rusty did a little bit too, and that's on the self-care side, and always setting aside time, for yourself, and a lot of self-care. And you kind of just hit on that. And I think that that's like a really big takeaway from both of you, is that we have to give ourselves that time. If you don't give yourself that time to reflect, you're not going to figure out these issues. You're not going to figure out, oh, I need to look into this a little bit. And I did that for myself in terms of my own personal health, because I've got some health issues going on that I've worked to fix as much as I can. I'm at the point now where I do have to talk to my doctor about certain things that I can do, but it's something that I highly recommend everybody doing. And even if you feel like you are slammed, I think you need to find...
Even more so if you're slammed.
Yeah, exactly. Give yourself that little bit of time. I don't know what... Everybody would be different, whether that's going to be... Give yourself a half hour before you go to bed, just to unwind, and that'll help you get better sleep, number one. But two, give you a little bit more of that mental clarity, and then maybe you get that idea that you need to write down and be like, I need to look into this.
Yeah, totally. Yep. What Andrew said. Yeah, no, it's vital.
I'm glad you agree.
It's so vital. And it's, there's that saying, when you go flying, and it's like, you got to put your oxygen mask on before anybody else's. This might be a little crass, but I'm going to say it anyway. You're no good to anybody if you're dead.
Yeah.
You can't go play Brahms 2. You can't go play your big solos. You can't go to your lessons. And you certainly can't be creative when you're running on fumes. That's the less crass way of saying that.
Yeah.
But it's, I think too, I was just sort of called to say this while you were speaking. Everybody deserves self-care, and I don't think that sometimes folks realize that you deserve to be cared for and you deserve to look after yourself. I bumped up against that a lot when I was doing music. It was like, I don't deserve to take time off because I'm not the best horn player according to so-and-so. Or I don't deserve to go and have a break or watch a movie because I have this scratchiness in my sound still, and my teacher's on my case about this every week and he seems like he hates me or whatever it might be, so I don't deserve to look after myself. Could not be further from the truth, because when you're not well, you can't do anything well. So of course these things persist, and of course things feel harder because they are. So I think that topping up, refueling, and then getting back in touch with, like, okay, I have this problem and I'd like to solve it, so now I know what the problem is because I spent some time looking for it. It's huge, right? We're always worried that things are going to take too much time, but actually if you take that 30-minute break and you tend to all of those pieces, everything starts to move a little bit more smoothly anyway, so you're not wasting any time. It's just reallocating and efficiency, I guess, but it's it's really important to care for ourselves, and especially as teachers too, because if we show up to our lessons and we are a tornado, that's not going to feel very good for those students, especially people who are sensitive, like musicians. They can tell when you're not doing good, or if you're just like angry at something and you haven't had any time and you're resentful that you have to be teaching for so long. Your students they're not going to know what's wrong. They're just going to think that you're mad at them. So it's caring for ourselves is caring for other people in a bit of a roundabout way. So if you need any convincing there, you can convince yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And from personal experience, I know there have been times where I've gone in to teach just to either been in a bad mood, been exhausted, been whatever, because I was not taking care of myself the way that I needed to. This kind of goes back to what I was going through the last couple of years. And that very much speaks volumes to me, and gives me a little bit of reassurance, because it's like, okay, I really did do the right thing with what I want to do. So I'm very happy about that. All right, so we got one more topic that you had mentioned, and that would be, where to go? The relationship between stress, panic and anxiety, and injury or illness, and why this is particularly important for musicians.
Oof, that's a hard-hitting one, isn't it?
We're going to end on a banger. Okay, where to start? So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier with trauma and the nervous system.
So again, I'm most of this learning is from Gabor Mate, if I'm being fully transparent, which I love to be, because I want everybody to go and read about it so that they can know the things I learned that blew my mind. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people, and most people that I've spoken to, experience some form of pain in their body, if not an injury. I've seen a lot of young folks with like carpal tunnel, or I see a lot of brass players with focal dystonia these days, and I know that this happens too. I've heard some cellists and all kinds of stuff. So we see a lot of injuries in our industry. We see a lot of illness too, I think. Of course, there are these studies that are starting to come out from, I think they're in the UK, just talking about rates of depression within orchestra members. So we're starting to see that these things are present. Nobody had any doubts about this. It's just somebody paid attention long enough to actually notice. But so stress and injury and why it matters to musicians. Okay. So stress is a very complicated thing. Read about it.
Oh yeah.
But essentially, what, in my opinion, and from what I've learned, it seems that when we get outside of our window of tolerance, so a window of tolerance is like, okay, I'm okay. This was really crappy, but I'm okay. Like, I I'm not flooded, so I'm not having a panic attack, and I'm not just like so checked out that I've dissociated and no longer feel like a human being. I'm right where I need to be able to function like myself. When we get outside of that, so if we are overstressed, overworked, having a really tough time with something, our body kind of goes into fight, flight, freeze, depending on who you are and how your body works. And sometimes it gets stuck there. And our bodies really aren't meant to be stuck in the survival responses. So when you need to get back into your parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. I don't know, some people are talking about the vagus nerve now. So this is the vagus nerve, is the parasympathetic nervous system. It's really important to get back to that place, because that's where we heal, it's where we recover, all of this stuff. And we were talking about trauma earlier. So when we have these things shoot us out of our window of tolerance, or we're stuck outside of our window of tolerance and our nervous system never gets the chance to regulate itself, your system is completely out of whack. So you're probably going to get sick more. You're probably going to get a cold. You're probably going to have all kinds of things happen to you, if not some kind of an injury. So I have a lot of curiosities around different repetitive strain injuries, as like from a somatic approach. Very curious about that. But what I do know is that in this particular industry, most of us are completely out of our window of tolerance 95% of the time. Most of the time.
I'd agree.
Like,
from personal experience.
Right? Like, I don't think I'm over exaggerating here. Like, it's pretty crazy how like intense we are in our own mind and body, and then in this environment around us too. Like, it's just constantly going at 100%. So the work of Gabor Mate is showing us now that things like repressed anger, repressed fight or flight or freeze responses, compromise to our immune system, compromise to our entire system, it's all one thing. Like, we're just this one body, right? It's sometimes we break it off into these different components, but like, we're just one thing. So it makes sense that when things start to come up of this, just like so much fear, push it down. Your body can't handle that after a while. It's kind of like, I like to think of trauma or too much stress in the body over time. It's like if you're shooting a bow and arrow, when you put that arrow on the bow and you let it fire, nothing bad happens to the bow. The arrow goes and the energy is diffused. It goes into your target or whatever and it's gone. It goes back into the earth. If you just like snap your bow and arrow shut on itself all the time, its joints are going to start to crack, the string is going to fray, it's going to break. It will break because you're putting all of this energy into a closed loop that doesn't go anywhere, and it's going to break. So I think, we have pretty high stakes as elite performers because we're usually outside of that window of tolerance for our jobs. Like, there's a lot of adrenaline involved. And many other things. That's very simplified, but there's a lot going on for us. And so if we're not diffusing that tension somewhere, we're going to break. Yeah,
simple enough.
That's really it.
Yeah. And I get the last note that I do want to end on is, can you explain the services that you offer? I'm going to provide links for everybody to find you. So they're going to have my words at the beginning for the intro, but I want to hear it from you. Like, what do you offer? What is...
Yeah, of course. A few different things. And it's kind of in the works right now. So like I said, I'm working towards being a counselor. I'm not quite there yet. There's a registration process and I'm got to finish my second year of school. So I'm not doing counseling stuff yet, which is fine. Just learning. But yeah, so I offer life coaching, which is essentially just like having somebody in your team to help you see things you might not have seen and to help to strategize and to make plans and to just like help support where you're at. So it's not like we don't go deep into healing and trauma stuff. we just kind of hang out with what's here right now and help support that moment. If you want to dive back into healing past traumas or mental health crises that might be going on, I at this point would refer you. But check back in another year and I will not have to refer you. Yeah, so I do that. And I also offer a lot of just like, I do creativity and inspiration coaching, which is all just like, that's just kind of like playing. We just kind of hang out and play and start to come up with ideas about things you might want to do. So I kind of have that in the context of like people who are writers, people who are making music, people who are doing whatever and just need some sparks. So I do that. I do some peak performance work, which is kind of like a lot of psychoeducation pieces where I'm like, here, did you know this thing about this tool? What would it be like if you tried that? But it's all just like a collaboration between me and whoever I'm working with. We just like see where this person's at and like, what do you need? What can we do? So yeah, try to keep it pretty fun and like supportive and collaborative. I'm doing a few different, I used to do them as lessons, but they're kind of like coaching lesson hybrids, because I think it's important for us to like bring the instrument into the room and let's work with what shows up. So if you have to play a solo or you're going to do an audition, bring your instrument, let's do a mock, and let's work with your emotions. So I do sessions that are like about healthy practicing, about performance preparation, mental skills, all these kinds of things. And yeah, sometimes I have people, you can bring your instrument and we can see what comes. We can not have your instrument at all. You can take a break from that. Yeah, so there's all kinds of things like that. I have a bunch of workshops that I do. There's more in the works too. But for now, I've got a few different workshops that you can like, I run them sometimes, now and again, just for people to sign up. So you can keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, it's just like they're bookable by any organization. Things like self-care for artists, incorporating coaching teachings into your practice room to help set you up for further success. A few different things about headspace and self-talk. Working on developing, like we were talking about earlier, for teachers, trying to develop these workshops for teachers to be able to like acquire some of these skills, like different communication techniques or listening techniques, empathizing, all these little just skills that maybe they kind of slipped through the cracks because our education's been a little behind. So yeah, I think that's pretty much, that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate hearing your thoughts on all of this. It's been fantastic.
I'm so glad.
So thank you very much, Lucy. Yeah.
My pleasure.
So glad to have you on.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's great to hear about everything you've been doing and all your thoughts as well. I'm always happy to chat about this stuff.
Thank you so much for joining me, Lucy. If you want to find out more about her, I left links to all of her stuff down in the description below. And with that, I pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts on mental health? Don't forget to buy me a drink if you want to support me financially. Also, who should I talk to next? Let me know down below, and I will of course see you next time.